The shadow in my closet. I was 7 the first time I saw it. I remember because it was the night after my birthday. My parents had tucked me in, kissed me goodnight, and turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of my nightlight in the corner. I was never afraid of the dark, but that night felt different. The air was heavy, the silence too deep, like the world outside my blanket had disappeared. Then I saw it, a shadow, standing inside my open closet. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The shape was tall, too tall, stretching up to the ceiling. It had no features, no eyes, no mouth, just darkness. But I could feel it staring at me. I pulled the covers over my head and squeezed my eyes shut. My parents had always told me monsters weren't real, that they only existed in bad dreams. But I wasn't asleep. I was awake, and the shadow was still there. The next morning, the closet was empty. My mom laughed when I told her about it, brushing my hair back and saying it was probably just my imagination. I wanted to believe her, but it came back the next night, and the night after that, always standing in the closet, always watching. For years, I never spoke about it again. I convinced myself it wasn't real. I grew up, left home for college, and tried to forget the things that lurked in childhood fears. Until last week, I was back home, visiting my parents for the first time in years. My childhood room was just as I left it, the same bed, the same dresser, the same closet. I laughed at myself for ever being afraid of it. That night, as I lay in bed, something woke me up. A feeling like being watched. I turned my head slowly toward the closet. The door was open, and the shadow was there, exactly where I had last seen it all those years ago. Unmoving, waiting. I couldn't breathe. My body froze, just like when I was a child. But this time, something was different. The shadow stepped forward. I didn't stay to see what happened next. I bolted from the bed, running down the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. My parents rushed out of their room, confused, asking me what was wrong. But when I turned back to my bedroom, the closet door was closed. The next morning, my mom made me coffee, her face pale. "I heard something last night," she admitted, stirring her cup. "In your room." It sounded like whispering. I didn't answer. I didn't want to tell her that for the first time in my life, the shadow had moved. And I knew, deep in my bones, that it wasn't just watching anymore. It was waiting for me to come back. A haunted road that leads to nowhere. There are roads in this world that lead to strange places. Roads that seem to defy logic, that don't appear on maps, that swallow those who dare to travel them. Some say these roads exist between worlds, a passage for lost souls searching for an escape. Others believe they are simply cursed, created by something sinister, something not meant for the living. One such road exists in the heart of Appalachia, a nameless stretch of asphalt hidden deep within the dense forests. Locals whisper about it, but they never speak too loudly, because those who do tend to disappear. The first warning: Jake had always been a skeptic. As a travel vlogger who specialized in urban legends and ghost stories, he made a living debunking myths. When he heard about the so-called road that leads to nowhere, he was intrigued but unconvinced. "It's just an abandoned highway," he told his audience in a live stream before the trip. "Nothing more than an old, forgotten road with a cool story attached to it. Let's check it out." His friend and cameraman, Ryan, wasn't so sure. "Dude, I've been reading up on this place. People go in and they don't come out the same, if they come out at all." "That's exactly why we have to go," Jake said, grinning. "We'll prove it's all just superstition." So, armed with cameras, flashlights, and enough supplies for a night, they set off, entering the unknown. Finding the road wasn't easy. Even with GPS coordinates from a paranormal forum, it seemed to shift locations. They drove through winding back roads, mist curling through the trees, until finally, there it was. A single, cracked asphalt road, stretching into the darkness of the forest. No signs, no markers, just an unnatural silence that settled over them like a thick fog. Ryan hesitated. "Man, something feels off." "That's just your imagination," Jake said, stepping onto the road. The moment his foot touched the pavement, the air changed. It was subtle, like a pressure shift before a storm, but enough to make his stomach tighten. They pressed on, filming as they walked. The deeper they went, the more the world behind them seemed to fade. The trees looked identical, their branches stretching like skeletal fingers. There were no sounds, no birds, no rustling leaves, just an eerie stillness. The vanishing point. "Dude, check this out," Ryan called, pointing ahead. The road abruptly ended. Not in a normal way, not crumbling into dirt or leading to a dead-end sign. It just stopped. The pavement dissolved into an abyss of darkness, an empty void where no light could penetrate. It was as if the world itself ended right there. Jake hesitated. He'd been to haunted places before, but this was different. It felt wrong. "Maybe we should head back," Ryan whispered. Then they heard it. Footsteps. Not behind them, not beside them, but ahead, coming from the void. Something in the dark. Ryan fumbled with the camera, swinging it up just as the footsteps stopped. The air was thick with tension. Jake took a cautious step forward. "Hello?" His voice barely carried in the unnatural silence. The void responded, a whisper, faint but undeniable. "You shouldn't be here." Then the darkness moved. A figure emerged, its outline shifting like smoke but undeniably human-shaped. It had no face, no features, just the suggestion of a person. It stepped onto the road and the asphalt beneath it cracked as if unable to support its weight. Ryan grabbed Jake's arm. "We need to go. Now." Jake had frozen. The figure raised a hand and suddenly the road behind them began to stretch. The entrance, their way out, was gone. Panic set in. They turned and ran, but the road kept going. The more they ran, the longer it seemed. The trees, the mist, the silence, it all blurred together into an endless loop. Then came the voices, soft, distant at first, then louder. Dozens of whispers, overlapping, growing more desperate. "Stay. Join us. You belong here." Jake's vision swam. The air grew thick, suffocating. He stumbled, falling to his knees as the whispers became unbearable. Then, light, a blinding flash. Escape or something else? Jake woke up gasping. Sunlight streamed through the trees. The road was gone. Ryan was next to him, shaking him awake. "Dude, what the hell happened? We were just..." But the words died on his lips, because in Jake's hands was the camera, still recording. And on the screen, a single frame of a road stretching into darkness, and a shadow standing at its edge, smiling. The entity watching from the window. There are things in this world that defy logic, things that lurk just beyond the veil of what we consider reality. And sometimes those things find a way to reach us when we least expect it. It all started with the window. David had always been a rational man, a science teacher by profession. He believed in what could be explained, measured, and proven. Ghost stories were nothing more than campfire tales meant to thrill the imagination. But one night, all of that changed. David lived alone in a modest two-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. His house wasn't particularly old or ominous. There were no tragic backstories of past owners meeting untimely ends. It was just an ordinary house, or so he thought. One evening, as he settled into his couch with a book, he had the unsettling feeling that he was being watched. It was that inexplicable sensation that crawls up your spine, making the hairs on your arms stand on end. He turned his head, and his eyes landed on the large window across the room. The streetlights outside cast long shadows along the pavement. The glass reflected the soft glow of his living room lamp, but something felt off. The feeling gnawed at him until he finally stood up and walked over. As he peered outside, he saw nothing but the empty street, the occasional parked car, and the houses of his sleeping neighbors. Shaking his head, he let out a chuckle. "I'm just being paranoid," he thought, pulling the curtains closed before heading upstairs to bed. The first sighting. The following night, as he was brushing his teeth, he glanced out of the small bathroom window. And that's when he saw it. A shadow. A figure standing in the dim light just outside his living room window. His breath caught in his throat. He blinked, wiped his eyes, and looked again. Nothing. David's heart pounded. He convinced himself it had to be a trick of the light, but the feeling of being watched lingered. He slept with his bedroom door locked that night. The watcher returns. Days passed without incident, and he began to push the experience from his mind. But then, one night, it happened again. He had been working late at his desk when a flicker of movement caught his eye. His home office had a window that faced his backyard. He turned his head just in time to see something duck out of sight. Adrenaline surged through him. He grabbed his phone and rushed downstairs, flicking on every light as he went. He peered out through the back door, but the yard was empty. Yet, the feeling remained. Like unseen eyes still lingered just beyond his vision. That night, sleep refused to come. Every creak of the house felt sinister. Every shadow stretched too long. The entity revealed, then came the worst night of all. David had grown wary of his own home, but exhaustion weighed heavily on him. He drifted into a restless sleep, only to be awakened by the feeling of someone standing over him. His eyes shot open. The room was dark, but the glow from the streetlights faintly illuminated the window across from his bed. And standing outside, looking in, was the figure. This time, he saw it clearly. It was tall, unnaturally thin, its face obscured by shadow. But the worst part wasn't its presence. It was the realization that he was on the second floor. David froze, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His body refused to move, trapped in primal terror. The figure tilted its head, its hollow eyes locking onto him. And then, it smiled. The skin around its mouth stretched in an unnatural way, revealing rows of impossibly sharp teeth. David scrambled backward, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He fumbled for his phone and snapped on the flashlight, but the moment the beam touched the window, the figure was gone. Not vanished, not faded, just gone. The aftermath. David never stayed in that house again. The very next morning, he packed his essentials and checked into a hotel. He put the house up for sale within the week, unable to bear another night in that cursed place. He never told the real estate agent why. Who would believe him? But sometimes, on sleepless nights, he wonders if it was truly the house that was haunted, or if something far worse had taken an interest in him, because even now, long after he's left, he still feels it. That lingering presence, watching, waiting, and one night it might just find its way inside.